Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to America is in the Heart, a Personal History by Carlos Bulosan. Part 1, Chapter 7. Then the heavy rains came, and my legs began to swell, preventing me from going to school. I stayed in the house wondering what would happen to me. But when I began to recover, Francisca played with me. Like my baby sister, I crawled on the floor to the window and watched the boys and girls of my age going to school. Sometimes a boy on his way home would stop beneath the window and read aloud to me. Sometimes a girl would come to the house and teach me how to sing. One afternoon, my mother came home from the public market and found me crying silently. "What is it, Alos?" she asked. "I would like to continue going to school," I said. There was a puzzled look in her eyes. "You will go as soon as your sister is big enough to be alone in the house," she said. I showed my teeth and smiled. "I will wait, Mother," I said. "That is a good boy," she said. But I did not get well for a long time. There were days when my legs were reduced to normal size, but there were also days when they were abnormally large. I thought I would never walk on my feet again. My father no longer came to town because the last installment on our land was past due. Although he felt that the money lender would not be too drastic with us, he had hired himself out to some farmers in the village. He earned 50 centavos a day, digging in the muddy fields with antiquated implements. But it was the only work he knew, the only work available, and he could earn a little money on which to hang his hope. At this time, my brother Luciano, the soldier, came home to live with us. He had just completed his 3-year service in the Philippine Scouts and was honorably discharged. He had contracted a serious lung disease while he was in service. The army sent him home with the idea that in a few months he would receive some kind of monthly pension from the United States government. Luciano was 20 years old, but he looked younger because of his pale face. He had joined the army at 17, but before that he had been an agent for one of the large sugar companies in Manila. He had recruited workers from the dispossessed peasant provinces in northern Luzon, passing through Binalonan with truckloads of men and women on their way to the great sugarcane plantations in the south. He had stopped now and then at our house, but I was then living with my father on the farm. I first saw Luciano when he came home from the army, sick and tired and disillusioned. He bought a small soldier's cap and gave it to me, but it was stolen by one of the boys in the neighborhood. My brother carried me in his arms, and we went from house to house asking about my cap. He was in his uniform, and when the peasants saw him, they whipped their boys mercilessly until they revealed who had stolen my cap. Luciano was a young man of wide experience. He was one of 2 men in the town who could operate a typewriter, and so was needed at the Presidencia. He was also the first to know about machines, automobiles, and motorcycles when these first came to Binalonan. There were many important things he could do that few of the townspeople knew. While I was still unable to walk out of the house, Luciano used to go to the grassy river with horsehair snares. He would entwine 2 thick strands together and loop them to about the size of a peso, attaching the twines to the sturdy talahib stem. He would plant them under the bushes in the river bottom. "The birds will go to the river at noon for a drink of water," he would explain to me. "So I put the snares in their sibang or trail, and they will go through the loops without knowing it. Their eyes are very weak in the sunlight. I would like to see you plant the snares, I said. You must get well, and I will show you how to catch birds without hurting them, he said. One afternoon, Luciano brought a sibed, or crying bird. One afternoon, Luciano brought a sibed, or crying bird, and tied it to the table in the living room. It was a beautiful bird, but it cried all the time. My sister Francisca played with it, but the bird would not eat anything. It's dying of starvation, I said. It is your bird, Alos, said my brother. You must keep it alive. I hobbled about the seabed and tried to feed it with corn. It looked me straight in the eye and cried, filling the house with its mournful nocturnal noise. I caught it in my arms and held it in the light. Why is it crying, brother? I asked. It has lost something precious, I guess, said my brother, stroking the bird gently, his eyes far away. Maybe a wife and some little seabed. Wouldn't you cry if you had lost something dear to you? I would, I said. I would cry until I died. Francisca started laughing and pushing the bird toward the wall. She could not understand why it would not eat. The bird crouched in a corner and looked at my sister, crying and bowing to the floor as though it were a human being in mourning. It is about to die, I said. You must try to make it live, Alos, said my brother. The bird is healthy and strong outside, but something is eating it inside. Its heart is bleeding, Alos. I tried to make the bird live. I blew my breath into its delicate throat, cooing soft words to it, but nothing helped. When the bird died, no word could console me. My brother carried me in his arms to the river and let me watch him contrive the snares under the bushes. I would hang on his neck and watch his hands expertly push the thin blades of grass, putting the snares in place and patting the soft sand under them. After we had planted all the snares, we would go to the shade of a camachile tree. My brother would climb the tree and throw the choicest fruits to me. The taste was bitter, but we liked it. Sometimes we went farther up the river and bathed in the deep pool. Luciano would place me on the edge of the pool and rub my legs slowly with red clay. Then, holding me gently in his arms, he would dive into the water and spring up for air when he knew that I needed it. At sundown, we rounded up our snares. Some birds struggled violently and the snares tightened sharply around their necks, and they died. Some stood placidly and waited for us to catch them. My brother held them with one hand and I with the other. I put my arms around his neck and hung on his back. Then we went home slowly, shouting at the village dogs that tried to leap at our birds. While it was customary among the peasants to eat birds, my brother never allowed us to eat the ones we caught. We never thought of killing them, but considered them part of our family. They became tame and ate with us like children. They walked freely in the house, running to safety when a stranger came to visit us. I remember this was the most pleasant period of my life. My father had taught me to be kind to animals because they were useful on the farm. And from him, I had learned to deal with our carabaos as though they were human beings. I used to sleep on the back of our favorite carabao when I was a herd boy in the village. When I fell on the ground, the animal would crop the grass around me until I awakened. My brother Leon had taught me to be few of words and to stick to my convictions. He had also taught me to love the earth. Amado, because he had had no chance to go further, had taught me how important it was for a man to study. He who had so little education knew how necessary it was to go into the world with a good education. And Macario, who was torn by inner conflicts, had widened my mental horizon by telling me about the lives of other men in faraway lands. But Luciano did not have to go away to show me the beauty of the world. We went to the river and snared birds and brought them home. We did not catch them for their usefulness, but for the aesthetic pleasure we found in observing them. I had the rare opportunity of watching them in their various moods. My education with Luciana was very useful to me when I was thrown into the world of men, when all that I held beautiful was to be touched with ugliness. Perhaps it was this wonderful interlude with my brother that finally led me to an appreciation of beauty that drove me with a burning desire to find beauty and goodness in the world. The rarest bird in our part of the Philippines was the parrot. It was a small, gray and red-breasted bird with a melodious voice. It was Luciano who introduced tamed parrots to our town. He built a small cage and covered it with horsehair snares. He put a quail in the cage and hung it on the highest branch of the santol tree in our yard. The cage was connected to one of the windows of our house with a long string that we had made from maguey fibers. The quail was not the best decoy for a parrot, but it was the smallest bird we had in the house. A parrot appeared, and when it noticed the quail, it flew from one limb to another until it was close to the cage. It stopped and peeked around the tiny bars, singing rapturously to the quail. It jumped on the roof of the cage where the snares were thick. Its neck was caught by several loops. It struggled violently, only to be caught by the legs. My brother lowered the cage to the ground, and we rushed outside to look at the parrot. "It is our first parrot, Alos," said my brother, "but we will catch others when they come to the tree." "I like it," I said. "It is a very brave bird." "It is in love with the quail," said my brother. "When you are in love, you are brave. You are not afraid of death." "Do you think it knew that there was danger in the cage?" I asked. "Maybe," said my brother. "Birds are like human beings. They have a strong sense of death and end of life. Now let us go to the house and feed it with bananas." We tamed the parrot and put it in another cage, but it looked sullenly at us. After a while, we hung the cage outside one of our windows and it began to sing. Then we put it in a strong cage and used it for a decoy. We caught many parrots after that and sold them. When we had saved enough to start a little store, Luciano went to town and borrowed some building implements. He found a suitable spot by the overland highway that had become popular with American and European tourists. They passed through Binalonan on their way to Baguio, stopping only for water and food and to take pictures of the natives. My mother was in bed again with another baby sister, and my father was very happy to have 2 daughters. When the store was finished, Luciano bought some bananas and mangoes from the people in the neighborhood. All day we sat on the bamboo bench in front of the store, waiting for customers. The women in the neighborhood came with their few centavos, but mainly they wanted petroleum for their lamps. My brother wanted to sell petroleum, but he did not have enough money to buy a whole can. When a tourist car would break down near the store, he would repair it and earn a little money. We watched the automobiles pass by, hoping the tires would blow out. When the moon was out in full, my brother would call the boys in the neighborhood and persuade them to wrestle in the empty lot at the back of the store. The ground was softer there than on the highway, where we usually wrestled in the daytime. But when there was no moon, he would bring out the oil lamp and watch us wrestle in the faint light. I was not strong enough to be shaken, but my brother told the smallest boy to wrestle with me. It was a good practice, and it taught us to be fair and decent. Then Luciano began to worry about his pension from the United States government. He lost interest in the store and wanted to go into politics. He was thinner now. He coughed at night, and there was a sad shine in his eyes. I sat in the store waiting for customers, but nobody came. The vegetables and fruits began to rot. Finally, we closed the store and sat on the bench waiting for some miracle to happen. One morning, my father came running to my brother. "The moneylender has taken my land, son," he said. "How much more do you owe him, father?" asked Luciano. "It is 100 pesos, said my father. "I promised to pay in 3 weeks, but he won't listen to me. I'd thought that by that time the rice would be harvested and I could sell some of it. Then I would be able to pay him. He sent 2 policemen to Mangusmana to see that I do not touch the rice. It is my own rice and land. Is it possible, son?" My father stopped and looked eagerly into my brother's eyes. "Can a stranger take away what we have molded with our hands?" "Yes, father," said Luciano. "It is possible under the present government. There are no laws to protect the tao against the unscrupulous practices of wealthy men in our country. I am afraid you will have to give up your land." My father could not believe it. Sadly, he glanced at his ugly, dark hands, then looked into my brother's eyes, his face dim with broken hope. "There is something wrong in our country when a man can take away something that belongs to you and your family," he said, looking at his hands again and standing silently for a long time. After a while, he noticed me. He put his hand on my head and said, "This is the end, son." He turned around and walked slowly toward our house. When he was gone, Luciano coughed violently and tears filled his eyes. He went to the store and came out with a handful of sharp nails and threw them into the road. An automobile appeared and burst a tire. My brother ran out with his tools, knelt by the damaged tire and began fixing it. When it was repaired, the man at the wheel gave him 10 centavos and Luciano laughed guiltily when he put it in his pocket. We used to sit on the bench in front of the store, waiting for automobiles. My brother was always ready with the tools. Now and then an automobile came, but we did not earn enough to help my father. Then we gave up waiting for automobiles. My brother went to Mangusmana and planted tobacco, while I stayed in town looking for a job. When his pension finally came, he sold his tobacco to a farmer and came back to Binalonan. "Now I can go into politics," he said. "Is it profitable?" I asked. "Yes, if you care to make a business of it," he said. "I don't know what to do yet, but there is fun and glory in it." "I like practical results," I said. "I am a different person," he said. "Watch me turn this town into something else." Not long afterward, he became mayor of Binalonan. But even then, he knew that he was dying. I would go to visit him when I was in town, and he would take me to his house to show me his books. I would be coming home from another town where I had found some kind of work, and when I would arrive in Binalonan, Luciano would discuss politics with me. It seemed to me then that he was a man of great convictions, that he had great potentialities, and that he hated his narrow environment. It was the only world he knew, and he realized it. But he was determined to use every opportunity he had in that limited place. "You must never stop reading good books, Alos," he said. "My eyes are not good for reading," I said. "Go to Manila someday and buy a pair of good glasses," he said. "Reading is food for the mind. Healthy ideas are food for the mind. Maybe someday you will be a journalist." Journalist? What did it mean? Years afterwards, I remembered Luciano's hope. I was in a hospital when the letter came telling me that he had died of tuberculosis. I crept out of the bed and cried in the bathroom, holding my chest for fear the blood would burst out of my own perforated lungs. It was midnight and the hospital was in total darkness. Far away in the city, the lights were flickering like a string of pearls strung on the huge neck of a dark woman. And far away also, in the workers' Republic of Spain, A civil war was going on that a democracy might live. I remembered all my years in the Philippines, my father fighting for his inherited land, my mother selling bagoong to the impoverished peasants, my mother selling bagoong to the impoverished peasants. I remember all my brothers and their bitter fight for a place in the sun, their tragic fear that they might not live long enough to contribute something vital to the world. I remember my own swift and dangerous life in America, and I cried, recalling all the years that had come and gone, but my remembrance gave me a strange courage and the vision of a better life. Yes, I will be a writer and make all of you live again in my words, I sobbed. Chapter 8. The land question in Luzon was becoming more acute, and there were rumors of uprisings in the provinces where absentee landlordism was crippling the peasant economy. Rice was the main staple, and the peasants could not exist without it. But the rich rice lands were owned by men who never saw them. Each year the landlords demanded a larger share until it became impossible for the peasants to live. It was at this time that my father's land was taken away from him. A stubborn peasant like his ancestors before him, my father had always believed that life should be rooted in the soil. He sold our animals and came to town, and after a day of secret deliberation with my mother, he went to Lingayen to fight in the provincial court for the restoration of our farm. After 3 weeks, my father returned, defeated and broken in spirit. He had walked to the capital of Pangasinan carrying his sack of provisions, and when he arrived there, had great difficulty in locating the proper court in which to present his case. When he found the court, he could not locate the right people. He went from one clerk to another and from one room to another, pleading in his dialect and cursing his illiteracy until he had ransacked the entire provincial capital. He had no money, and the wise men at the court spoke to him in Spanish and English. What could a poor and ignorant peasant like my father do in an organization such as the provincial government of Pangasinan? He came back and stayed on in town, sitting around in the house until he was driven to drunkenness. My mother and I went to the town of Tayug, a rich rice land, and helped in the harvest. Tayug and 2 other neighboring towns belonged to one family. One could see the flowing expanse of gold in the month of October, but in November and far into the month of January, there was a continuous procession of carts hauling harvested rice to the granaries of the landlord. There it was threshed and sold to the rice companies in Manila. Then my mother went to Binalonan and returned with my sisters. Francisca was now nearly 4 years old, but Marcela was only a baby. They sat in the shade of the umbrella at the end of the long rows, away from the strong sun. My mother stopped now and then to feed Marcela, undoing her rough cotton blouse to her waist and putting her dark, pointed nipple into the baby's hungry mouth. Then she would put her in a makeshift hammock and go back to work. Francisca was already beginning to be aware of what we were doing. She stayed in the shade watching Marcela, but she came now and then to where we were working to bring us a jar of cool drinking water. Then she would watch over the baby until the day's work was done, singing when Marcela became restless and hungry. In the middle of the season, strange men began coming to the rice fields. They distributed leaflets and talked to us. My mother and I were so deeply absorbed in our work that we were not aware of what was going on. A rugged peasant boy made impassioned speeches to the harvesters. But as he was only a simple peasant like themselves, they paid no attention to him. I remember this fanatical peasant boy because years afterward I met him again in America. His name was Felix Razon. One day he came to the field where we were working with several men wearing black armbands. They told us to leave, but we did not understand. At night we slept in the field. The stars were so near it seemed we could touch them with our hands. Sometimes when I awakened between the tall rice stalks, I could feel the soft breathing of the earth. The sun came like gold, throwing its first beams downward into the immense plain. It lighted a new day of activity for us, and we cooked our breakfast on an improvised stove. Working with my mother was pleasant, and it gave me an impetus to strive for a better place. It was actually like working with my father in Mangusmana, with only one difference. I was a little older and more experienced. In the village, life was a simple peasant lullaby. We had our animals and our house. In Tayog, the work was harder and harsher, and the people were more varied. And I had two little sisters who interrupted our work with delight. A few days later, Felix and the other men came to the rice fields again to persuade us to sell our share of rice and to leave. Most of the harvesters sold theirs, but my mother sold only a part of ours. We were some distance from the highway when we saw hundreds of men with black armbands walking excitedly toward the town. They were members of the Colorum Party, a fanatical organization of dispossessed peasants that terrorized Luzon. It professed to be semi-religious, but it was actually a vengeful sect of anarchistic men led by a college-bred peasant who had become embittered in the United States. As soon as Felix came to our part of the field and told us of the impending revolt, my mother tied our share of rice with a rope and carried some of the rice bundles on her head. I carried some of it too, but she also carried the baby Marcela. Francisca, however, refused to be carried. When we reached the plaza, we saw many of the Colorum at the kiosk, falling in line and preparing their attack. The policemen were running excitedly about the Presidencia, piling bricks and sandbags outside the windows and doors. They were waiting, ready with their guns. Then from beyond the Presidencia, climbing up the riverbank like a stream of black beetles, the Colorum came rushing upon the building, dispersing the few guards who were waiting outside with their antiquated pistols. They fired into the air and leaped behind trees when the police challenged them from behind the barricaded windows. The Karomata ponies at the station started running away in all directions. The bus that was discharging passengers near the schoolhouse turned around and sped toward Binalonan. The attacking band of the Colorum increased. They appeared from everywhere with their black flag and fired upon the men in the Presidencia. My mother grabbed Francisca and we ran to the tall bushes by the roadside. "Why are they fighting, Mother?" I asked. "Why, son?" she said, her ignorant face searching for the words to answer me. "Why? I don't know, son." "Are we not coming back to cut some more rice?" I asked. "No, son," she said. Francisca started to cry, hanging on my mother's skirt. "Hush," said my mother. We looked toward the Presidencia. A policeman came out bravely, but he had not gone far when he was shot in the back. He fell under a flagpole. Another policeman arrived, then another, but 5 of the Colorum ran after them, shooting as they emerged from the tall acacia trees around the Presidencia. They engaged in hand-to-hand fighting behind the coffee shop at the station. The Colorum rushed into the Presidencia, and after a while their flag appeared at the window. Then there was a respite, except for the jubilant rebels who were pouring into the town hall. The town was deserted. The dead were scattered on the lawn and in the street. When it began to get dark, my mother told us to follow her. We crept through the bushes, dragging the bundles of rice. We came to a wooded place west of town, away from the rice fields. We stopped and looked back. Then the guns began again, sputtering like a speeding motorcycle. The black flag was no longer atop the Presidencia. I saw a mass of men scattering at random, running into the bushes in the plaza and firing. Then the Philippine and American flags appeared on the poles in front of the town hall. The night came on, and there was silence. We walked to Binalonan silently, looking up when a caromata came by. I carried Francisca on my shoulders. Sometimes my mother gave the baby to me and she carried Francisca. We met a detachment of the Philippine Constabulary rushing toward Tayug. When we arrived in Binalonan, the news of the uprising was already there, and our neighbors assailed us with many questions, but we could not explain the incident. Eagerly, we awaited developments. During 4 days of unrest, the local government of Tayug had changed hands several times a day. Finally, the constabulary conquered the rebels and restored law and order. But the revolt in Tayug made me aware of the circumscribed life of the peasants through my brother Luciano, who explained its significance to me. I was determined to leave that environment and all its crushing forces, and if I were successful in escaping unscathed, I would go back someday to understand what it meant to be born of the peasantry. I would go back because I was a part of it, because I could not really escape from it, no matter where I went or what became of me. I would go back to give significance to all that was starved and thwarted in my life. Chapter 9. Now my father was a pathetic little figure in the house, and he went out only when it was absolutely necessary. He was now a landless farmer. Local politics no longer interested him. He was completely broken in spirit. He had none of his animals. Even the store by the highway that had been given to him by my brother Luciano was gone. The new presidente had closed it for reasons never clear to any of us. The court had threatened to put my father in jail, so he finally gave it up and sat in the house all day. Luciano was getting deeper in local politics. He was receiving 24 pesos from the United States government, but he spent most of it on his doctor because his lungs were becoming worse. With what he had left, he bought cigars and cigarettes for the loafers in the Presidencia. He was looking ahead, he informed me. He looked so far ahead that the scavengers had him stripped to his shirt before he finally became mayor of Binalonan. I was getting restless and fearful of the uncertainty that pervaded our household. I felt like running away, anywhere. I wanted to cast off the sudden gloom that shadowed our family. And I thought the only way to do that was to escape from it. I would also be escaping from my family and from the bitter memories of childhood. "I am leaving now, Father," I said one day. My father said nothing. He simply looked at me. He was trying hard to hold back the tears that were gathering in his eyes. He was remembering and looking through me into the certain future and the dark fate that awaited me there. And his mouth trembled a little because he knew what it was I was forsaking. What I was plunging into so desperately, because he, too, had been young once and broken by a wall that stood between him and the future. My mother wept silently. She was a woman who had shed few tears for anyone, but now that her last son was leaving, the reserve that had kept her composed for so long, broke down in one disturbing maternal agony. Like my father, she was afraid to foresee what would happen to me now that I was leaving them and would be alone in the world. My sister Francisca came to the door and touched my bundle. But the baby Marcela was on the floor, pushing my bundle and saying, "Manong," which means brother in our dialect. This was almost the only word she knew, and she expressed her grief with it. I started down the ladder. Francisca put her face on the door and started to cry aloud. "Alos!" my mother cried. "You are too young to go out into the world." I was 13 years old. Maybe my mother was right, although she believed that it was reasonable for me to work like a man in Binalonan near them. But to live alone in some unknown place? No, she did not know that doing the work of a full-grown man had matured me beyond my age, that I had outgrown my narrow environment. My father lifted my bundle and put it on his back. I walked after him without looking back at the house that was my childhood, because that time of my life was gone forever and there was no return. There were fears in that house of childhood, and I was leaving them forever. I was fleeing into manhood, into another struggle against other fears. We stopped in the Presidencia, and Luciano came out with a bunch of newspapers and magazines under his arm. "Where are you going, Alos?" he asked. "I am going to Baguio," I said. "I thought you would wait another year," he said, putting some money into my pocket. "It will be easier for me if I go now," I said, "and maybe I will be able to go to America someday." "Be sure to let me hear from you wherever you are," he said. "Are you really planning to go to America, son?" asked my father suddenly. "Yes, father," I said, "but I will come back to Binalonan before I leave. I hope I shall be able to save enough passage money in 2 years." "Your bus is not due for 2 hours," said my brother. "Let us walk to the schoolhouse and see what the children are doing." We walked through the tall talahib grass in the plaza. It was recess time, and the children in the yard were playing and singing. We hung on the pointed bamboo fence and watched them, shifting our weight when the ants bit our legs. The bells on the church tower began to ring, and we looked up to see what it meant. It was not the mass hour, and there was no funeral procession in the street. There was something portentous about the tolling bells. The sound was deep and sad, as though they were mourning the death of an important man. "What is it, father?" asked my brother suddenly. It is nothing of importance," said my father. "The bells are ringing for the end of a decade." Then he looked at me meaningfully, and there was a sudden surge of affection in his face. "But they are also announcing the birth of another decade." I did not understand what my father meant. We moved to another corner of the fence and watched the younger children singing and circling an acacia tree. When my bus was ready to leave, we rushed through the tall grass again, and my father fell into a paddy. He took off his muddy shirt and came running after us to say goodbye. Then my bus started northward, following the road that I had helped build 3 years before. It was goodbye to Binalonan and my childhood. I was going away from all of it forever. I looked back through the window and saw my father and Luciano becoming smaller and smaller in the distance. Then it came to me that my life there was too small to float the vessel of my desires. I wanted to cry out to all those who were left behind, but my tears choked me, and only a violent fit of trembling shook my body. I knew that even if I went back to them after many years of loneliness in another land, I would not be able to pick up where I had left off. I was going out into the world to build a new life with untried materials, and I knew that if I succeeded and went back to them, then it was only to drink of the water of our common spring. At last, we came to the river where I had been almost washed away to my death, the same river where my mother had lost her precious beans. Then, Pozorobio and its cement public market, and I remembered the elegant girl who had struck our basket of beans, and how my mother had knelt on the pavement picking up the beans, saying, "It is all right, it is all right." When we came to the first hill, it began to darken and the air changed radically. The bus climbed steadily, passing through tall pine trees, skidding and stopping when we came to sharp turns in the road. I looked down into the valley below. It was deep and dark. A few lights twinkled here and there. I sat in position and looked ahead, remembering what my father had said in parting. Baguio is a small city in the heart of tall mountains where the weather is always temperate. There are no rains nor heavy winds, but in the morning there is a light mist in the air, and when you walk through it you feel as though you are walking through silk. The roads are asphalt and the most modern and beautiful in the Philippines. The houses and theaters are built in Western fashion. Tall pine trees cover the mountains, and at night one can hear the leaves singing in the slight wind from the deep canyons beyond the city that comes up with the sweet tang of fragrant vegetation from the surrounding valleys. Far down there are lustrous truck farms where industrious Igorots produce grapes, cabbages, lettuce, and various fruits. In the center of the city is a lake strung with multicolored light bulbs that sparkle at night. Near the lake is a dancing pavilion, open only on Saturdays. And farther down, within shouting distance of the town hall, is the public market, teeming with European and American tourists. Under the cement awnings are numerous ox carts, owned by the lowland people who come to Baguio periodically to sell rice, corn, and bananas. It was at this market that I first landed. Europeans of affluence, Americans with big businesses in the islands, and rich Filipinos lived in Baguio. Their beautiful white houses dotted the hills. I went about asking the store managers if they needed a janitor or a messenger boy. But the stores were fully staffed because it was summer and the students were on vacation from high school. The storekeepers preferred students because they could speak English to the foreigners. I went to the great hotels and asked if there were anything open for me, but they also catered to English-speaking clients. Only the public market remained. I walked around the lake and watched the lights in the water, yearning for the sight of food and the touch of bed. When 12 o'clock came, the lights went out. Once more, I retraced my steps to the market and found a place to sleep between the sacks of rice. In the morning, some of the traders from the lowland began cooking on improvised stoves. I hung about and offered whatever services I could, hoping I would be invited to eat with them. Sometimes they would let me eat hot rice, and sometimes they would give me a banana or an egg. I went around the vegetable stalls and picked up what they had thrown away in the gutter. My clothes began to wear out. I was sick from eating what the traders discarded. One day, an American lady tourist asked me to undress before her camera and gave me 10 centavos for doing it. I had found a simple way to make a living. Whenever I saw a white person in the market with a camera, I made myself conspicuously ugly, hoping to earn 10 centavos. But what interested the tourist most were the naked Igorot women and their children. Sometimes they took pictures of old men with G-strings. They were not interested in Christian Filipinos like me. They seemed to take a particular delight in photographing young Igorot girls with large breasts and robust mountain men whose genitals were nearly exposed, their G-strings bulging large and alive. Then a rice trader from Binalonan took pity on me. He could not afford to hire anyone because he did all his own work, but he had noticed that I was acquiring a cough. He told me to help him carry the large sacks of rice on a wheelbarrow from the cart to the booth. I also wheeled the sacks to the automobiles of the customers. The wheelbarrow was almost too large for me to push, but it was a job and I had to eat. It was on one of these trips with the wheelbarrow to the houses near the market that I found a better job. An American woman came to the market one day, bought some rice from my employer and asked me to carry it for her. I followed her with the small sack of rice on my back. She went about the booths and bought pottery and other products from the Igorots. I returned to my employer's booth and taking the wheelbarrow, put the woman's purchases into the barrow and pushed it down the road to her apartment. She lived near the library where she was working. She was really a painter, but working in the library brought her a small income. She had worked for 15 years in a small town library in Iowa and had saved her earnings. When she had saved enough, she bought an artist's paraphernalia and sailed for the Philippines, where her father had gone and died in the war that was to link the destiny of those two countries. I will never forget Miss Mary Strandon on the day I pushed the wheelbarrow to her apartment. When I had carefully piled the vegetables and rice in the kitchen, she opened her purse and offered me 5 centavos. "What did you do to your face?" she asked suddenly. I was ashamed to tell her that I had hoped the white men and women who came to the market with cameras would photograph me for 10 centavos. They had always taken pictures of natives with painted faces, and I had hoped that I could fool them with the charcoal marks on my face. I said it must be dirt. "Wash it off," she said, giving me a bar of soap. I filled the bucket in the kitchen and the soap suds tickled my skin. It was the first time I had ever used soap. "Go along now and return the wheelbarrow," she said finally. "But come back here if you would like to work for me." I returned the wheelbarrow to the man from Binalonan. Miss Strandon hired me and I learned to cook the way she wanted me to, and to clean the apartment the way she did. I became adept at general housework. There was another American woman who lived in the apartment next door. She had an Igorot houseboy whose name was Dalmacio. She was a teacher in one of the city schools, and the boy who did her washing and cooking was one of her pupils. When our work was done for the day, Dalmacio and I would go to the lake and sit on the grass. "I will soon go to America," he said one day. "I am trying to learn English so that I will not get lost over there." "I am planning to go to America in 2 years," I said, "if I save enough passage money to take me there." "You don't need money," Dalmacio said. "You could work on the boat, but English is the best weapon. I will teach you if you will do some work for me now and then." He put a book in my hand and started reading aloud to me. "Repeat after me," he said. "Don't swallow your words. Blow them out like the Americans." I repeated after him, uttering strange words and thinking of America. We were reading the story of a homely man named Abraham Lincoln. "Who is this Abraham Lincoln?" I asked Dalmacio. "He was a poor boy who became a president of the United States," he said. "He was born in a log cabin and walked miles and miles to borrow a book so that he would know more about his country." A poor boy became a president of the United States. Deep down in me, something was touched, was springing out, demanding to be born, to be given a name. I was fascinated by the story of this boy who was born in a log cabin and became a president of the United States. That evening, I troubled Miss Strandon with questions. "Will you tell me what happened to Abraham Lincoln, ma'am?" I asked. "Where did you hear about him?" she asked. "I was reading," I said. "I didn't know you could read, Alos," she said. "Lincoln was a poor boy who became a president of the United States." "I know that already," I said. "Tell me what he did when he became president." "Well, when he became president, he said that all men are created equal," Miss Strandon said. "But some men, vicious men, who had Negro slaves, did not like what he said. So a terrible war was fought between the states of the United States, and the slaves were freed, and the nation was preserved. But one night he was murdered by an assassin." "Why?" I asked. "Why?" she said. "He was a great man." "What is a Negro?" I asked. "A Negro is a black person," she said. "Abraham Lincoln died for a black person?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "He was a great man." From that day onward, this poor boy who became president filled my thoughts. Miss Strandon began giving me books from the library. It was still hard for me to read and to understand what I was reading. Miss Strandon realized that I had a passion for books, so she made arrangements with the city librarian to let me work for her. I found great pleasure in the library. I dusted the books and put them in order. When Miss Strandon wanted a book, she would tell me. I would put my feather duster in a corner and rush to the rack. I was slowly becoming acquainted with the intricacies of a library. Names of authors flashed in my mind and reverberated in a strange song in my consciousness. A whole new world was open to me. A few people came into the library. They were always elegant and patronizing, and now and then a stranger would come and talk with Miss Strandon about books. But most of the wealthy residents asked that books be delivered to their homes. I used to make the deliveries, hugging the books and running joyfully in the sun. How beautiful their homes were! I would stand outside the door and hand over the books to a white liveried servant. On my way back, I would remember our grass hut in the village of Mangusmana and compare it with the magnificent mansion I had just left. I would remember many things in my childhood. My father and his land, my mother and her salted fish, my brother Luciano, slowly dying of tuberculosis, and my two other brothers who had gone away. I was fortunate to find work in a library and to be close to books. In later years, I remember this opportunity when I read that the American Negro writer Richard Wright had not been allowed to borrow books from his local library because of his color. I was beginning to understand what was going on around me, and the darkness that had covered my present life was lifting. I was emerging into sunlight, and I was to know a decade afterward in America that this light was not too strong for eyes that had known only darkness and gloom. The months passed quickly, and suddenly a year had gone. I stayed in Baguio until another year was nearly completed. I became restless and homesick. I told Miss Strandon that I wanted to go back to Binalonan. I had saved a little money working for her, but I did not know what to do with it. It was not sufficient to ransom our land from the moneylender, so I considered buying a carabao for my father. With this plan in my mind, I left Baguio. I do not remember all that Miss Mary Strandon said to me in parting, But I remember her saying that she would like me to come someday to her hometown of Spencer, Iowa. She told me that the trees there were as luxuriant as in Baguio. 15 years afterward, I went to Spencer, hoping to find her. But she had been dead for more than 10 years. I wrote her name on a copy of my first book and donated it to the local library. I think she would have been happy to know that I would someday write a book about her country.